We left off last time with the big question. How do the colonies transform from being a group of diverse colonists to having a shared identity? And was that identity primarily American or British? Well, there's two reasons for colonists developing a shared identity. One has to do with stability, and the other, change. I know they sound contradictory, but they really work together in the colonies. So let's talk about stability first. Politics and life for most colonists was more settled in the 18th century than it had been in the 17th, when there had been constant struggles for power and regular uprisings. In the 17th century, colonists witnessed Bacon's Rebellion, slave rebellions, and the King Philip's War, and in England there was a glorious revolution where Parliament overthrew the king. But things calmed down in the 18th century. By the 18th century, Britain was more stable, and the colonies grew their own class of elites that was taking power. Now, one of the biggest reasons for stability was that in the first half of the 18th century, England adopted a policy known as salutary neglect, leaving the colonies to their own ends. They had rules like the Navigation Acts, but they didn't have the money or manpower to actually enforce them. And, with imperial authority weak, the large landowners, merchants, and lawyers in America who dominated colonial assemblies got used to having power and began to see it as their right. With England paying the colonies very little attention, these colonial elites start getting used to filling in the vacuum and governing themselves. And as a result, the influence of local representative assemblies grew tremendously. At the same time, the 18th century witnessed some massive cultural changes. There was a huge growth in what's called the public sphere, which is the world of political debate and organization independent of government, where citizens discussed issues of the day. Now, you are very familiar with the concept of the public sphere, even if you've never heard the term. If the school wants to consider changing the dress code, that decision will end up being officially debated at faculty meetings, committee meetings, and, if you are lucky, in the principal's advisory council, where your peers will represent you with their opinions. However, the conversation doesn't stay there. Instead, you all debate and discuss in the hallways, in the lunchroom, in the bathrooms, on the football field, on the phone, and, my favorite place of all, through social media. These modes of informal conversation are the public sphere, and they matter more than you think. While the ultimate decision on what to do may lie with the official committees, they would be foolish not to consider the viewpoints expressed in the public sphere, particularly if those viewpoints are passionately expressed by a strong majority. Now, as political philosophies and news arrived from England, colonists discussed and debated them. And it's important to note that all of these ideas are British. Through this process, the colonists end up fostering a common British identity, increasing the colonial desire to be more like Britain. And print was crucial to these changes. Mr. Benjamin Franklin was the most successful printer in America with his newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette. He also set up print partnerships throughout the colonies between newspaper editors to help spread news faster and faster. Franklin also aided in the development of urban institutions. These helped to alter the culture available. This was especially true in big cities of the time. Places like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, where clubs and literary and philosophical societies became hothouses for ideas about democracy and, as time passed, independence from England. Now, in the colonies, they didn't have Twitter, so what constituted the public sphere there? Well, colonial elites tended to meet in coffee houses, but working class colonists also gathered in coffee shops, and more commonly, in taverns, talking politics or picking up pamphlets and editorials. Franklin established the Lending Library, the American Philosophical Society, and other groups. He was an advocate of refined intellectual life and kept the people in society connected with the philosophies of the day. And while neither the Spanish nor the French colonies had easy access to printing presses, the British colonies were highly literate, and they published an endless stream of political literature. By the Revolution, 3/4 of adult white males could read. Libraries and newspapers also became more common across the 18th century. These were institutions that sprang up to serve this literate public. And over time, reading helped spread revolutionary ideas. But this cultural revolution happened largely because of a consumer revolution. All of the colonies have major trading ports, and by the mid-18th century, these are growing at exponential rates. The rise in trade and newspaper advertising kicks off the beginning of a consumer revolution. It transforms how colonists think of themselves. They are consuming British goods. They're trading with Britain. They're receiving news from Britain. And it all makes them feel more British. So, back to our big question. Stability and change fundamentally transform the colonies. They create an identity that is uniquely British. The irony is, though, that while they're identifying more and more with the British, they're also increasingly expressing more and more independence of thought because of salutary neglect and the rise of the public sphere.